The recording starts. Right. Okay. So our assignment today is to discuss the technical aspects of Panchatantra, the structure of Panchatantra, the language of Panchatantra, and the forms of literature which are used in the Panchatantra. Now, obviously, this being in Sanskrit, we'll not be able to talk about the quality of the language per se. We are not equipped to do that. Although maybe in some other class, we'll invite a Sanskrit expert to talk about this quality. But the first thing that I would like you to note is that the Panchatantra is different from an ordinary beast fable or a collection of stories, in the sense that it is not just a simple collection of stories told by a single narrator. My point being that the structure of Panchatantra is intricate and complex. Intricate and complex. It cannot be described as a collection of stories because a collection consists of single or individual tales loosely strung together to form a continuous narrative at best, told by a single narrator. Right. So if you look at the structure of a collection of stories, it is usually told by a single narrator, and it is usually strung together without any interlaced kind of a structure. But in Panchatantra, what we have is an extremely intricate artistic whole with highly organized and complex structure, with several narrators functioning at multiple levels of storytelling. Now, I've given you that kind of a statement so that you can use it in your responses in the exams, but let me break this up a little bit. So, we have already seen that in Kakulukiyam, the principal narrator is Vishnu Sharma. Then we have the narrative of Livestrong. The Crows and the Owls. Then the narrative of Livestrong, talking about the reason between the conflict of the Crows and the Owls. And then again, interlaced stories in between. Then we have the story of Red Eye. Then we have the stories of Livestrong once again. In between, we have stories by the other ministers of Fostrong's cabinet. So what we do have is a structure that operates across many levels, highly organized. That is to say, you have layers and layers of narrative, each interlaced with one another. And you have several narrators. One story is boxed in by another story, followed by another narrator story, which is maybe boxed in by another story, right? What is important to note here is that even within the broader structure, there are other powerful narrators. Who are these powerful narrators in Kakulukiyam? These powerful narrators include Livestrong and Red Eye. But both of them suggest one common theme, that the enemy is to be completely eradicated. And secondly, that, very often the enemy can, with intelligence, defeat the more powerful. So in that sense, even if there are multiple narrators, there are common themes within the text. So it might be that different narrators come from different positions, but it might be that their tales also have the common running theme. Again, different narrators might have different themes. For example, Four Strong's different ministers provide us with different tales with different perspectives. One says you have to be merciful, one says you have to make an alliance with the enemy, and so on and so forth. Right? So we cannot say that there is one clear structure within the Panchatantra. What we can say is that it is highly organized, complex structure with several narrators functioning at multiple levels of storytelling. But how is it strung together? Is there a principle of unity within the tale? Yes, there is, in the sense that all of these tales lead up to the main story of the crows and owls in Kakulukium, and the 5 tantras lead up to the theme of the education of the king and the self-fashioning through the narrative of Vishnu Sharma. That is to say that there are dispersed narratives, but they are unified in the sense through this entire concept of Vishnu Sharma. Vishnu Sharma is the narrator who holds the Panchatantra together. That is why I'm saying multiple narrators, multiple levels of storytelling, yet the sense of an artistic whole. It is like a web of stories, as it were, not a simple, not a simple necklace of stories which is linked by a common narrator. Right? এটা একটু ভেবে দেখতে চেষ্টা করো, একটা হাড়ের মতো জিনিস নয়। It's like a web, একটা complex এক ধরনের জালের মতো, right? Okay, now this is the first point. The second point, of course, is that it uses several kinds of literature within itself. What do I mean by that? It uses the beast fable, for example. It uses pedagogic literature to teach, that is to the fable with a moral, right? So maxims and precepts. But it also encourages, Panchatantra is a text that also encourages what we will call the polemical, Polemical. What is polemical? Polemical is when a discussion or a debate is carried out. So you obviously understand that if the point of debate is statecraft and how to interact with one's enemies, then Four Strong's different ministers and their stories, also Cloudy's different ministers, provide us with different perspectives and discussions and debates on the same issue. Therefore, the text is not only, I would say, a pedagogical text to teach through maxims, but it is also a polemical text in the sense that it encourages debate about what to do. And debate is an important aspect of the Panchatantra as such, discourse and debate. The third form that I would also like to talk about is this topic of satire that exists in the Panchatantra. Panchatantra is also a text that sort of satirizes avarice, that satirizes folly, that satirizes weaknesses of a king. Therefore, it uses the genre of satire to a maximum extent within its form. The Panchatantra is, of course, a text also that encourages humor, right? It creates situations where there are situations of humor, of intelligence defeating lesser intelligence. Just think about the Brahmin and his ass. And the goat that he carries on his shoulders. And it is told that he's carrying an ass or he's carrying a dead cow. and he sort of throws it and runs away. Now, there are several things there. One, there is humor at this Brahmin being fooled. Secondly, there is maxim that the less intelligent might be defeated, usually with an application of intelligence. And there's also a certain degree of satire at the superstition of the Brahmin, that he's so credulous that he believes that the goat that he's carrying is actually something else. Right. So what we're looking at is therefore a text that includes one, maxim and pedagogy; two, discourse, debate, and polemics; three, established literary forms like beast fable and satire and humor. Therefore, the text is a frame story. This is the main story, the preamble with the 5 narratives of books, tantras set within it. So we are actually looking at a kind of a structure of a larger circle, right, where there are the 5 tantras, each narrative having its own frame story. That is Kakulukiyam, the story of the crows and the owls. Narrative, this is what happens, why Cloudy has to face this crisis. Dialogue, very important. Panchatantra thrives not only on narrative. So it does not tell once upon a time this happened, but then Cloudy asks his ministers, "Tell me, O Livestrong, what do I do?" And Livestrong says, "O king, this is why you should do this." Right? So it is a text that incorporates both narrative and dialogue. Right? Now, what happens when dialogue is used is that you use in the third person, in the narrative, the third person. Once upon a time, there was a crows and owls. Third person. Orthat omniscient narration bala hoy etake. Omniscient narrative. So from the top, that is the narrator knows everything, is like God. And when you have a dialogue, you are using a first person narrative. So the person is saying, "I want to do this. This is what you should do." Right. So it sort of mixes this third person omniscient narration with the first person narrative of dialogue and well-defined characters. So characterization is another important aspect of the Panchatantra. Now, obviously, you understand these are not human characters. So you cannot have, very well-defined human traits within them. But within their limited abilities, these characters are, for example, Livestrong with his prudence, wisdom. He's shown to be old, but he speaks slowly. He has a specific kind of way of delivering his addresses. Once again, Red Eye is more impulsive, is more forthright, direct, and angry, for example. Right? So each of these characters, more aggressive. So each of these characters is fleshed out to a certain degree within the limited structure of the beast fable. Right? So well-defined characters, once again, very often the crow symbolizing intelligence, the owl signifying violence, and so on and so forth. Right. Within the frame or the tantra of each 5 books are small n-box stories that we have talked about, the Chinese box structure or the Russian doll structure, where there are narratives within narratives, stories within the main frame. Each tale and subtale, therefore, has a narrator with an audience and a dialogue. So every single story has its dedicated narrator and audience, right? Together with maxims and precepts and discourses of ethics and polity, all woven into the fabric of narrative to form a rich pattern. So it has a texture, texture. It has a texture. So it's like as I keep on saying, because you are first year students, you should think of a metaphor of a web. A web is complex. It has its own separate, intricate designs. Therefore, the Panchatantra is also like this web with its intricate design, circles, n-boxed narratives, different narrators, different audiences, but linked up by Vishnu Sharma, but linked up by the five tantras, right? And this question of polity, state polity, and individual niti. And the pattern of structure of the frame story and box tale is repeated at several narrative levels. So Red Eyes stories repeat that, Live Strong stories repeat that, Vishnu Sharma's tales repeat that. So at different levels, the same structure is repeated. So each tantra mirrors the structure of the work as a whole, right? Now, of course, this being the main frame of our discussion, let us also talk about the admixture of verse and prose in the Panchatantra, which we have already talked about. Now, you will obviously find that the prose is directed primarily towards the narrative, and therefore the story, and therefore the concept of delight. It invites imagination, it invites humor, it makes the narrative move forward. What the verse does is deliver the moral, and the verse delivers the moral so that it can be remembered. Remember one thing, that you tend to remember rhymed verse much more easily than prose. So the rhymed verse actually serves as the kernel, Kernel, nidjash, the kernel of the text, and it serves to through its verse, it serves as a reminder, so that it is grafted, it is almost embedded into the memory of the listeners. So this prose and verse together are welded so that the moral and the delight are also welded. Now locate the position of the verse. The verse often occurs at the beginning of the story. It also occurs at the end of the story, right? So the message is once delivered at the beginning of the story. The message is often repeated at the end of the story, so that ultimately the narrative or the story exists for the maxim. অর্থাৎ ন্যারেটিভটা নিজস্ব ইম্পর্টেন্স কম, ইম্পর্টেন্সটা বেশি হচ্ছে of the precept, of the maxim, of the lesson that it seeks to impart. So within Panchatantra, there's also a clear structure of a narrative which is directed to conveying a certain message, to teach. Now, what is this teaching? This teaching, as we discussed in the themes of Panchatantra, is niti. Rajniti, as state polity, how to win friends, how to make friends, how to win allies, how to break alliances, what not to do of a king, how to wage war. So Rajniti Shastra. Also niti as in daily living, right? So tales which are democratic, tales which take smaller characters and talk about existences of the four purusharthas. What are the four purusharthas once again? The four purusharthas being dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. Now, this brings me to the only story that is there in pure verse, and that is the story of the dove which sacrificed oneself. Now, it is interesting that the Panchatantra uses maxim. Panchatantra teaches us. Panchatantra uses humor. Panchatantra uses satire. What the Panchatantra does not use is pathos, right? Panchatantra is a text that is not very emotional in that sense of the term. Take the story for the Brahmin and the snake, for example. The snake bites the Brahmin's son. He dies. The Brahmin, cries, but then he goes to the snake once again for money. So it's a text that is, that takes death, violence, less emotionally. The only story, and therefore the emotional quotient within the Panchatantra is slightly lesser. If you read the other stories, you will find that the king cannot be emotional. The lion, for example, loves the bull, but he's always suspicious, right? So it's a text that, because of its political nature, does not encourage emotion or great pathos, barring one story. And that is the story of anomaly here. In anomaly, when something which is different, of the dove, of the self-sacrificing dove. And this story is one of pathos, one of sacrifice, one of pining of the husband for the wife, right? So this is a one-off story, and it is probably because of this, to draw out the pathos of the story, that it is told purely in verse. Now, please also remember that this being oral literature, a collection of stories, very obviously it had different sources. Therefore, the author of the Panchatantra, or the version that we have, was trying to bring together stories from various places, stories from various traditions and forms, into one coherent, complex structure. And therefore, he experimented with form, inset narratives, 5 tantras, maxim, humor, satire. He also experimented with the coexistence of prose and verse. And because these tales are generic in nature, generic, Generic, because they serve for all kings of all places, they have a quality of universality to them. Therefore, two things are not definite in the Panchatantra. One is the time, and the other is the place. The time is deliberately kept vague. It is once upon a time, and the place is, or the places are places which are not defined very clearly. You might say that, but you said that it is Mahila Ropaya. But there's also, the tales taking place on the side of a forest, at the edge of a pool. Why? Because within the narrative, Panchatantra is claiming that it is a primer. It is a basic educative text for kings of all times, right? Therefore, very deliberately, to overcome the problem of a particular time and place, the Panchatantra has indefinite times and place. Of course, this suits also the beast fable framework. Now, many of you might wonder why Panchatantra did not use specific individuals and places. I'm going to say, if Vishnu Sharma had used characters rather than animals, would that have been any difference? It would have. It would have, in the sense that they could have been identifiable personalities and therefore encouraged hostilities. Also, by making these characters animals rather than human beings, Vishnu Sharma was trying to create stereotypes rather than very definite individuals. Also, There's this element, because of this beast fable, because of this ingenuity, imagination, the beast fable also has this attraction for children. But let me point out to you that even if the Panchatantra has been largely read as children's literature, in terms of structure, in terms of its interaction of verse and prose, in terms of its use of satire, maxim, pedagogy, polemics, it is a highly complex text, deeply political in its quality, and it combines the element of utile and dulce, delight and instruction, with a great deal of dexterity. So, if the wisdom of the Panchatantra is complex, if it offers multiple perspectives on different political situations, then in terms of structure, language, organization, and use of different forms, as well as prose and verse, the Panchatantra is structurally and technically, structurally and technically, an extremely complex work of literature, right? It is with these comments that I would like to bring this discussion to an end, in the sense that we have more or less suggested whatever we wanted to suggest, and I will stop the recording and then invite your questions at this point of time. Just give me a few moments.